Tonight, as part of our program, Ray Albert, who is a local historian, he is also he's an ex-school principal,
elementary school,
and he says he is not a Civil War historian. He is he's interested in the Civil War.
I am a student
of it. I've heard him speak before on the Battle of Gettysburg, and he's enthusiastic. He has funny little things that he will tell you. He's also in a mixed marriage. His wife is from the South. He's from the North. So he may say a few things about the South. So I'd like to introduce Ray for his program tonight on the Battle of Chickamauga.
I'd like to introduce my wife, Ann, please stand. And she's the one that got me started with the Civil War. I married her when I was a Yankee soldier in Atlanta, Georgia. And so she doesn't believe there was a Civil War. I have to be careful. It's actually a war between the states.
Yes.
Did I get that right?
That's right.
Okay. So she's here to keep me honest. I began studying the Civil War mostly because of her. What is it, 60 years we're married? And
so he's trying to prove him wrong, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I will say
I think my grandmother had lots to do with that.
yeah. Well, let's not tell that story. But you folks are, you've probably heard Gettysburg time and time again. But I'll bet you're not quite familiar with Chickamauga. This battle was the most significant battle in the West. More people killed, wounded, missing in action in Chickamauga than any one of the battles, with the exception of Gettysburg, 51,000. Antietam was the highest one-day battle, but Chickamauga was a two-day battle, and casualties from both sides ran about 34,000. 34,000. A large number. Start thinking 34,000. Start thinking the population of this town. And think of the devastation that occurred at that time. So I'm gonna take you back to Chickamauga, but I've got to give you some preliminary things. Now, you folks here, now some of you people may not know this, but one of the things that you want to do as far as military strategy in those days, I think it's still true today, a little more difficult, is outflank your enemy. So you can see how that works here. If this is the line of battle and I come at you, of course, you're going to have firepower, which is what the Civil War soldiers were taught. Mass your firepower, get your firepower. But if I come at you from, let's say, this point, then what happens is this gentleman here is going to be shooting in the direction of his friends. It makes one person on this side at least 3 times as powerful as when attacking the front. Actually, some people have said 8 times as powerful. So the flank attack is what you want to do. Because I'm going to run through this and I'm going to say a flank and time again. What it means is the side. You get to the enemy side and you got it. You got it. By the time they recover and turn around, remember that these lines that they fought in battles were sometimes a mile long. Soldiers can turn them like that. You can't do that. So by the time they get turned around, battle was over. Battle was over. Okay, so I will mention flank time and again. But in Chickamauga, you got to know the major actors. The major actors in this Battle of Chickamauga were this one here, Rosecrans, General Rosecrans. He was a bright guy. Graduated 5th in his class. A very bright man. He was a devout Roman Catholic. He always carried Father, well, he didn't carry him, but he took Father Tracy with him. He'd get up in the morning for prayers, and then he'd get on horseback with Father Tracy, and he would ride along, checking his men, checking the area, and talking about God, literature, and the beauty of nature. That's the kind of guy he was. Well educated, very bright man, and a very good general. Now you're going to see where he made a mistake. And history probably won't be as kind to him as I am, because this man was an accomplished general, just a very fine person, very fine general. His men loved him. They called him Old Rosie. His name was Rosecrans, but they called him Old Rosie. So he was the Union general, and he led the Army of the Cumberland. The Army of the Cumberland. He had 4 corps with him. He had Crittenden's Corps. He had Cook's Corps. He had Thomas's Corps, and he had Granger's Corps. 4 corps. He led these 4 corps. The corps made up the Army of the Cumberland. Okay, let's take a look at this guy here in charge of the Army of the Tennessee. There was Braxton Bragg. But he was a very bright man. He too graduated in a different class, but he was 5th in his class at West Point. That's pretty good. He was a brilliant organizer, could organize his men. He knew how to care for his men. He knew how to take good care of them. He always had them supplied. It's good at that. However, he would get up in the morning and say his prayers, just like old Rosie did. And when he finished saying his prayers, he'd call in one of his generals and ream them out for one reason or another. He took good care of his men, but he wasn't loved like old Rosie. Men hated him. He was constantly berating some of his generals, and they weren't all bad. Some of them were kind of shaky, but some of the Union generals were not that good. But you'll see as we go along how he would do that. Another actor, this is General Longstreet. General Longstreet was a corps commander for Lee's army, the finest corps commander in either army. He was a great general. He had some faults. He was slow about getting his, if you ask Longstreet to charge at 8 o'clock in the morning, you can be sure that he's not going to be ready until 11. But when he was ready, he was ready. He was ready. He was a great leader, a great general. He stood 6'2", rode up high on a horse, even in the midst of battle, and led his men with the calmest. You would think that he's on parade in the middle of a battle. Never lost his cool. That was Longstreet. Longstreet was part of Lee's army. In fact, Lee said Longstreet is my war horse. Lee depended upon Stonewall Jackson, who at this point was killed and gone. And he depended on Longstreet. Longstreet had the 1st Corps in Lee's army. Now, how in the world? I'm talking about a battle that happened in Georgia. How can I be talking about Longstreet? Well, what happened is things were going badly, as you see. Things were going badly for Braxton Bragg. Things were going badly for the entire Confederacy. With the loss of, you're going to see 102 miles. The loss of 102 miles. They had to do something. And Lee said, I'll send Longstreet from the First Corps all the way from Virginia, 800 miles. And how do you do that? First time ever. First time ever. You put them on a train. There were no trains in warfare before this. Napoleon would have loved the train. Even Julius Caesar would have loved a nice train. Put him on a train, and they put Longstreet on that train too, and they all came west. Okay, that's a Confederate soldier. Terrific fighter, tough as nails. Tough as nails. Could eat a handful of corn and fight all day. That's what the Union Army was fighting against. Those kinds of people. If they were well led, like if they were led by Longstreet or Lee, they were unbeatable. If they weren't well led, well, okay, as you recall, this is the Order of Secession, 1861, 1860 to 1861. First state that seceded, South Carolina. And look at this, a question by Missouri, a question by Kentucky, a question by Maryland. No one was sure. No one was sure which side they would fight on. And all of you know that Missouri fought on both sides. Missouri fought on both sides. But that's what the United States looked like. I guess you really couldn't call them the United States. All right, there we go. Way back in December 31, New Year's Eve, there was the great battle of Stones River, and Bragg's army crashed against Rosecrans' army. It really was probably a draw, but Bragg thought he lost. Rosecrans thought he won. Just shows that the difference in personality can make a difference in what the general does. And so what happened is after that, that was the battle in Stones River right by Murfreesboro. After that, Rosecrans made his headquarters, kept his army in Murfreesboro. Meanwhile, Braxton Bragg retreated all the way 34 miles to Tarleton. Okay? That was December 31st. Then nothing happened. Nothing happened until June. Now remember, this was 1863. Well, the 31st was 1862. Okay, then January 1st, 1863. Nothing happened. Rosecrans just sat there. He would telegraph his commanding general, Halleck, who was difficult to get along with to begin with, and say, I need more cavalry to move. And Halleck would say, you're using up a lot of government money with these telegraphs, and you're not getting any cavalry. They argued for months, And during this time, what happened? July 1st, July 2nd, July 3rd, Gettysburg. July 4th, Vicksburg caved in. All of these things were happening. He asked Rosecrans, Rosecrans, how come you're not moving? He says, I need more cavalry. They said, besides that, it would be terrible if we lost two great battles at the same time. One that we're fighting here in the west and one that you're fighting in the east. Grant's comment to that says, yes, that would be bad if we lost both battles. But if we won both battles, it might not be quite so bad. But Rosie wasn't ready to listen to that. So he stayed until he got his cavalry. When he got his cavalry, he made 3 ingenious moves. 3 times he outsmarted General Bragg. Now, I don't want to blame this all on Bragg. I have a feeling that Bragg's cavalry was not supporting him. That's their job. The cavalry is supposed to be out there looking. Now, with Bragg's cavalry, he had Nathan Forrest, one of the great geniuses of war. But I'd have to say he was great at battle, but where the heck was he when 50,000 men were crossing the mountains? Where was he? Cavalry is supposed to find out. Well, Braxton Bragg didn't have that kind of cavalry. And so what happened is, starting in June, Rosecrans faked over here, faked to the left, and with Crittenden's corps, and then with Thomas and McCook's corps came down here, right along the river. Ingenious move. Bragg fell for it, moved his troops in the wrong spot, and found out that he was outflanked. He was outflanked. Rosecrans. Now take a look at this. But of course it's easy to say if you know the results. Rosecrans is moving down the railroad. How are you going to take 60,000 men and their supplies through the mountains? You can't. If you use the railroad, you can. So he was moving down the railroad. So first time, he fakes the left, goes to the right, cuts on through and moves on down this railroad. And of course it was all destroyed. Nathan Forrest had a lot to do with that. So Rosecrans thought ahead. He knew it'd be destroyed. He brought railroad builders with him. And they not only single track, it was a single track, they made it a double track, going all the way back to Nashville. Okay, then, after that, now, Bragg's army is down here, so what happened? Rosecrans again. Fakes to the left, it's getting to be an old story, and cuts in to the right. Crittenden's corps here, McCook and Thomas here. Okay. Then they had to make the last trip. Their aim was Chattanooga. Look at here. Uh-oh. I got to get a railroad in there. Sorry about that. Their aim was to get Chattanooga. Chattanooga had 4 rails coming to it. North and south, east and west. They at one time could reach Nashville with no problem. They certainly could reach Atlanta with no problem. They could reach Memphis to their east, and they could reach the east on this rail here. So Rosecrans not only wanted to get the railroad, he wanted to get Chattanooga. He wanted to get Chattanooga. So here we go. Third round. Again, would you believe this? I mean, I'm telling you this, it's true. It's hard to believe. Third time around, Crittenden fakes over to the left. Thomas Cook to the right. Bragg was fooled again. He thought for sure that Crittenden was the main force. It wasn't. This was the main force. And when that happened, the entire Army of the Tennessee was in retreat. Out of Tennessee at all. This is the Army of the Tennessee. They were just pushed out. 102 miles they were pushed out by Rosecrans movements. Now, they weren't easy movements. They weren't easy movements. And on the last movement that I just showed you, they had to go through Pigeon Creek. And that's a terrible place. The grass there, even the mules wouldn't eat. They had to carry everything. And on top of it, when it rains, it gets so muddy that sometimes they were marching in ankle-deep mud. When they had to cross the mountains, they would have to take a wagon train, and the infantry would come down the mountain, grab the wagon, and pull it with ropes up over the top. Now add to this that they had 17 days of rain. 17 days of rain, and they're slugging through this place. 17 days. But they made it. They made it. And now, let's see if I have it. Oh, the Union Army owned Chattanooga. Now I've got Chattanooga way over here. There's Chattanooga. Okay. But the Union Army crossed all of these mountains and owned Chattanooga. And they also, I didn't put a railroad in there. I got to get the road. With one of these, you can build a railroad. The railroad comes in through here. And remember? And it comes to a place a little further west of Bridgeport called Stevenson. And I've got a nice slide of Stevenson that you'll never get to see. Sorry about that. And it shows the men getting off the rail at Stevenson. It's a photograph. It's a photograph from 1863. And it shows the men disembarking in Stevenson with the rail coming on through. Because there was a bridge over, I didn't get that far. There was a bridge over the river right here. There was no bridge, and there still is no bridge by Chattanooga. There's no bridge there. The bridge going into Stevenson was a rail bridge. Naturally, it was destroyed by the Confederacy. Destroyed by the Confederacy. But Rosecrans was prepared for that. Believe it or not, he was so well prepared that he not only had equipment to build a double-track rail, he had equipment to build a bridge over the Tennessee. In fact, he didn't build one bridge. He built 3 of them. 2 were pontoon bridges, and 1 was the repair, getting into Stevenson. Built 3 bridges. Not only did he build 3 bridges, he had the equipment to produce steamboats, small steamboats, yes, but steamboats to run up and down the Tennessee River. He was totally prepared, and Bragg was totally outsmarted. But wait a minute. Bragg is not going to be fooled forever. Bragg was not getting good cavalry information. He had Wheeler on the left and Forrest on the right, and I don't know what happened to these people, but they just, that's about the Poorest Calvary, this is my opinion. Some historians might agree, some might not. But that's about the poorest cavalry I've ever heard of. 50,000 men coming over a mountain, and they couldn't come and tell Bragg that these men are over here. They're not where you think they are, Bragg. They're over here. They just didn't do that. But finally, they must have woke up. Maybe one day they came to see Bragg, and he yelled at them and told them, "You better get your tail out there and find out where they are." And he found out. They were spread out. They were spread out. Spread out in a very dangerous. Now, you remember? Bragg had 4 corps. One in reserve, and 3 corps that were doing the work. Crittenden's corps, up here, coming in around the mountain toward Chattanooga. Thomas's corps in the middle, 12 miles away in mountainous country, 12 miles away. And McCook's corps, 42 miles away. Let's get McCook in here. Yeah, we can get him in. 42 miles away. Rosecrans is all spread out. If Bragg can take advantage of it, that's going to be the end of Rosecrans' Army of the Cumberland. This is Bragg's chance. So Bragg gave an order to Hill, one of his fine generals, and Hill was a good general. He said, "Hill, they're coming into McLemore's Cove. If you can attack this one unit, you can destroy them. You've got 30,000 men. They only got 10,000 coming in. 3 to 1. I mean, this is great. Besides that, this is an enemy territory. They knew the territory. They knew the Union did not. And so out comes Hill, 30,000 men, and parks them right there in McClellan's Cove. He did not attack. That was September 11th. Now, Bragg was so angry at Hill that even later on he had some penalties, and maybe if I have time we'll talk about that. But he was really angry. So then he said, "General Polk, the Union Army is all divided. They're getting together, but they're all divided. You got a chance to trap them by McLemore's Cove." And he sent Polk out. And Polk went out and then sent a message back to Bragg and said, "We found the enemy, and we dug into a very nice defensive spot." He had a 2 to 1 advantage. "We dug into a nice defensive spot, and we're here, and we'll protect this land." Bragg was so angry. He hopped on his horse. He rode over to Polk. Now, Polk did not stay in the army as some of these generals did. He became a bishop for the Episcopalian Church. So you can imagine a bishop. And here comes Bragg, and he begins yelling at Polk. And they say the sky turned blue. He was worse than a mule skinner's. His language was something awful. And the troops just loved it, but it really didn't do much good. It was over at that point. Well, at this point also, Rosecrans is getting the idea that, uh-oh, my men are spread out. They're spread out. If Bragg gets me now, and Bragg almost did if his generals would have followed through. If Bragg gets me now, he'll destroy my army in detail. And detail means a piece at a time, and finish off the Army of the Cumberland. And so Rosecrans very quickly reassembled his army, or began to reassemble his army. McCook had to march 42 miles. Stonewall Jackson is famous because Stonewall Jackson, the fighters for Stonewall Jackson, this is a good thing I'm saying about the Confederates now. Stonewall Jackson's men would say, we are the foot cavalry. We're the foot cavalry, meaning they could march 25 miles in a day and be ready to fight. Well, McCook's corps marched 25 miles in a day over mountains. They did it. They did what Stonewall Jackson was famed for doing. They did it. They marched on. They're bringing the troops together. Rosecrans was getting his army together. He wanted his three corps marched in together, and he wanted Stanley as a fourth corps to stay way back as a reserve. And so they marched into this area here. Now this is Chickamauga Creek. Not a very big creek. Dan and I have been there 4 times. In fact, there's a couple of pictures that I have. One of Snodgrass's cabin. Yes, that's his name, Washington Snodgrass. He had 8 children, lived in this cabin. If we have time, I'll show you the picture. You see how they fit 8 kids, a wife and a husband in that place. But he lived at Snodgrass here. This says Brotherton. That's a Poe house. That's a Kelly house. But what happened is quickly, as quick as he could, Rosecrans got his army together. And what he tried to do is, and this is real generosity, Crittenden had 1 corps, but he was a so-so general, not that strong. McCook had another corps, and he was so-so. Not bad, but really not good. Thomas was the general in the Army of the Cumberland. So, talk about good generalship. Immediately, Rosecrans said, Braxton Bragg is going to hit me on the left. He's going to try to drive my troops into the mountains, out of the passes, and at that point, we'll be at the mercy of the Confederate Army. So he quickly moved his Thomas, and Thomas was not the furthest away, but certainly one of the furthest away, and put Thomas way up here. Now, these are roads. They're leading through the passes. This is McFarland's Gap, and this road would lead to Chattanooga. Okay? So, Thomas is put right there. His strongest general. Okay, below that, Crittenden's corps. Below that, McCook's corps. And they all kind of lined up on Lafayette Road. Sorry, I said that. In the South, they say Lafayette. Don't say Lafayette, or they're going to think you're a Yankee. Okay. They lined up on Lafayette Road. And they knew that Braxton Bragg would attack, and Rosecrans knew that Braxton Bragg would try to attack here. Now, if he could attack there and capture this road, you can see how there are no other passes. He would have the Army of Cumberland in his hands. He'd have the Army of Cumberland in his hands. So he attacked September 20th, 1863. Bragg is sending his best troops to attack here. And if he does succeed in capturing this road, the Army of the Company is trapped. There's no way out. This is Missionary Ridge. Behind it is a lookout mountain, 100 miles long, 2,200 feet high, almost impassable. Missionary Ridge is barely passable. McFarland's Gap gives you a good look through. So Bragg begins attacking there, and then what happened? Then comes Longstreet. Longstreet, 11 o'clock at night, September 19th, Longstreet arrives. And he says, Bragg, I'm here. My troops will all be here by tomorrow. The troops came on a train 800 miles from Virginia. Robert E. Lee loaned those troops and his best corps commander to Braxton Bragg. This would be the one hit. So for the first time, Braxton Bragg's army outnumbered the Union forces. No longer was Braxton Bragg a smaller army. It wasn't 60,000 to 47,000. It was 70,000 for the Confederates against 60,000. And so, 11 o'clock at night, Braxton Bragg made a good decision. He said, okay, Polk, I'm going to put you in charge of the right wing of our army. You continue to come around the flank and knock the Union Army off that road to McFarland Gap so they can't get to Chattanooga. In fact, they can't get out anywhere. You continue that. And Longstreet, I want you to charge and hit the middle. And hit the middle. Okay, now let's take a look at this. Because a strange thing happened. Stanley's Corps, Reserve Corps, way out here. Pretty smart. They could, even if the flank disappeared, Steedman can get through the gap. And Rosecrans had his men in divisions lined up here. Bragg, Palmer, Johnson. That's not Bushrod. There's two Johnsons. That's Yellow Johnson. Reynolds, Brennan, Wood, Davis, Sheridan. Oh, Davis, unusual. General in the Union Army, his name was Jefferson Davis. Okay. All right, so that's part of Civil War history. And so right down Lafayette Road, very near Lafayette Road, Rosecrans took that defensive position. All right, and it looked like he could hold it. And Rosecrans must have had an inkling that part of Lee's army was on the field. He must have known that. Now, historians aren't sure. But on the other side was Walker, Liddell, Cleaver, good General Cleaver, Story, and borrowed from Lee's army, General Hood. There is no one that has a more forceful attack than General Hood, either in the Union or in the Confederate Army. He could lead men to charge. He lost an arm in Gettysburg. He didn't lose it, but it was useless. And in this battle, the end of it, he got hit with a musket in the leg, and so they had to amputate on the field. And kind of a sad story, but this guy is a fighting man. When he recovered, he fought in the Battle of Atlanta, and the first thing he did was attack. That's what he knew, is attack. So this is what the lineup looked like. Now wait a minute. We're going to get to Rosecrans' one mistake. One mistake. that wrecked his generalship and wrecked his life. After this mistake, they say Rosecrans was never the same. You could see it in his eyes. This bright, bright man, you could see he was never the same. What happened is he had one of his captains, Captain Kellogg, right along the line to make sure that everyone is in shape. Wilder, Sheridan, Davis, Wood, Brannan, going all the way down the line, making sure they're all there. And Kellogg rode past Brannan's group, right? Let's get Brannan's group. Right here. These men had been fighting on September 19th. They were experienced fighters. So they were going to use a modern term. They dug in. They dug in. When Kellogg went by Brannan's division, he couldn't see Brannan. He couldn't see anyone. And so quickly he rides back to Rosecrans. He rides back to Rosecrans and says, you got a hold in your line. You got a hold in your line. Rosecrans says, well, tell General Wood, and this is the most confusing order, tell General Wood to close up on Reynolds and support him. Those are two military terms. Close up means if I were going to close up here, I would close up like this, right? But support doesn't mean that. Support means you go around and get behind it. So a conflicting order coming from Rosecrans, first mistake that I know of that he made, but a serious one. So he told Wood to pull back. Now, here goes Wood. Where'd Wood go? Okay, here goes Wood. He comes out of here and gets in support of Reynolds. Gets behind Reynolds. And by doing that, he opened a hole right there. Okay, so what happened is Longstreet skirmisher. These are Longstreet's fighters, experienced fighters. Longstreet skirmishers come back and say, Longstreet, there's a hole in the line. There's a hole in the line. We're not getting any fire coming back. Now, the difference between a great general and a superior general, Longstreet himself went out to look. Said, sure enough, there's a hole in the line. It's where Wood was pulled out to support Reynolds. Okay. And so Longstreet, and I told you Longstreet was slow about getting his troops ready. He was supposed to be ready at 9 o'clock, not Longstreet. He's going to take his time. He's going to make sure it's right. Longstreet set up 5 ranks over across the field in the Brotherton. He set up 5 ranks. And he told his men, this is where you aim, right there. There's a hole in the Union line. That's what Robert E. Lee wanted to do at Gettysburg. He wanted to blow a hole in the line and then get both flanks. And Longstreet was the one that ordered the charge. So those were Longstreet's troops under Pickett. That's exactly what Robert E. Lee wanted to have happen. Longstreet was against it at that time, but he saw that this was his opportunity. And at 11:10 that morning, 5 ranks of Confederates blew through the hole. They blew through the hole. They just about destroyed the Union Army. Just about destroyed the Union Army. All of these units here, Jefferson Davis, Sheridan even, Wilder, they were just wiped out. And of course, some of them were able to get along this road and get up to the McFarland Gap. The rest of them were trapped just where Bragg wanted them, in the mountains. They're trapped with their back against the mountains. these troops collapsed, and they collapsed up this way. Okay, now let's see what they did. They collapsed under Thomas. Hey, Rosecrans made the right decision. He put Thomas in charge of that flank to watch over that road, protect his army. And Thomas moved whatever he had. He did get some troops even from Sheridan that retreated and came up to him. But he found that Snodgrass Hill, where the Snodgrass cabin is, that little dot there of the Snodgrass cabin. Snodgrass Hill was an extremely good defensive spot. And he had Western troops, not Eastern troops. Western troops were lumbermen. They quickly cut down trees, made a defense line, made it safe to fire their rifled muskets. And Brandon tried the same thing, but unfortunately it didn't work for him, did it? They built a defensive position that was absolutely impenetrable. Absolutely impenetrable. And there they were. They didn't have to wait long. Pope Charge. Pope Charge. Still trying to cave in that line. And here comes Longstreet right on through, coming up this way and charging that way. Oh, that is an enviable position. That's an enviable position for anyone. If you could hit, Nathan Forrest could do that. If you could hit both flanks at the same time, boy, you could really do a lot of damage. So that's the kind of thing that General Thomas was up against. He got his men, and carefully he rode on his horse, and his troops said he seemed to be 10 feet tall. Calm as can be, saying, steady men, pick your man, aim low. Pick your man, aim low. And he just kept riding along, saying that same thing, steady. Pick your man, aim low. And so the men were kind of encouraged by this kind of leadership. And so what happened is there were at least 7 charges by Polk. At 12 o'clock in the afternoon, his army was just totally fatigued. Every charge was beaten back by Thomas's group. Now Thomas had additional men that he had picked up that didn't run off. So it wasn't only Thomas's men, but mostly Thomas's 41st Corps. Longstreet charged, couldn't get up the hill, couldn't get up Snodgrass Hill, came back, charged again, then let his men rest a little bit, and then began one of Longstreet's famous charges. He sent out, let's see if I get these in the right order, Hinman, Kershaw, Johnson, that's Bushrod Johnson, that's the other Johnson. And they all went up the hill and went right on back. About this time, Thomas's corps is running out of ammunition. They searched the ammo packs of the dead and the wounded, got as much as they could, but they knew the ammunition would not last. Longstreet was defiant. Wasn't used to having his men knocked down like that. So he brought in his reserve, Kershaw, and had them charge up the hill. They went up the hill and had the same result. So he went back to Bragg and said, if you give me more men, I think we can break their line. And Bragg says, I have no more men to give you. And at that point, I think Bragg was probably right. He probably, his men had just plain fought out. They were just plain fought out. But good news, at least for Thomas Steedman's corps. Heard without orders, heard the battle, came on down, brought men and ammunition. They were able to withstand another couple of charges. And then finally, the ammunition ran out, and Thomas, up on his horse, said, "Fix bayonets," as calmly as if I'm talking to you. Fix bayonets. And they did. They fixed bayonets. Now, the Confederate Army would seldom use a bayonet. They said, well, we never found a Yankee willing to stand still long enough to get stabbed by a bayonet. But bayonets were used in Chamberlain. Final attack in Gettysburg was famous for the bayonet charge. The Unions still used bayonets. And so they fixed bayonets, no more ammunition. And Thomas ordered a charge down the hill. Believe it or not, without ammunition, they charged down the hill and they pushed off the Confederate Army. But better yet, dusk came, darkness came. And so this was Thomas's chance. So he knew he'd have to retreat, but he wanted to retreat, as he says, retreat in order. Retreat in order. No running in my retreats. Retreat in order. So he began giving orders. Each brigade. You move on down toward the Carlin Gap, and finally on up to Chattanooga. So at the end of the day, there was a great victory. Bragg had a great victory.
Hi, thank you for watching Channel 798.
Thank you for watching Channel 7 and 98.
Hi, thank you very much for watching Channel 798.